So I want to start with something not pleasant. It's because this dirty immigrant scum is fake. This is a response I got to the previous stream. If someone mocks his dirty god, MB dollar, he will quickly bark, Khawarij, dog of Jahannam. This is a kind of response we get all too often from opponents. Unfair is a bit of a understatement in that you do have people who do go to extremes with regards to rulers and those in position of authority, in that they constantly praise them. They mention the good deeds and the good they do, which is actually counterproductive because, and I've heard this as an argument, well, because the Khawarij are always attacking the rulers, we should mention their good deeds to counterbalance. I think that's a quite weak argument, counterproductive. And the asl is that the Salaf, the pious predecessors, would not speak about the rulers, neither to praise them nor to dispraise them. So whilst inciting violent rebellion is undoubtedly a characteristic of the Khawarij, it does not defeat the Khawarij to then go on the other extreme and start mentioning all their good traits, if they have any good traits or any act of charity they may do. Why? Because that will only incite the opponents to mention all their bad deeds. So if one was to say, look, mashallah, Prince such and such, or Sultan such and such, or King such and such, or President such and such, or General so-and-so built this masjid, then that authority, that state, that principality, that kingdom, that republic may also have a nightclub, so they will bring that up. In fact, and this adds a degree of weight to it, this is a statement from a government minister, Sheikh Saleh al-Sheikh, who is an establishment scholar, for want of a better word or phrase, and look what he says.
من علامات أهل السنة الدعاء لولاة الأمور ومن علامات أهل البدع الدعاء على ولاة الأمور كما صرح بذلك البربهاري وغيره في كتاب السنة. لكن الدعاء شيء والمدح شيء آخر. المدح لا يجوز لأنه يراد به الدنيا، وأما الدعاء فيراد به صلاح الدين والدنيا والآخرة. فالدعاء مبعثه أمر شرعي لله، وأما المدح فلأهله مقاصد مختلفة، ولهذا العلماء يدعون ولا يمدحون مدحا مطلقا.
So there you have a statement, quite clear, doesn't require any explanation of any sort. And the reason, incidentally, people accuse this, smear some of us with being agents or in cahoots or receiving funds or bootlicking or whatever it is, aggrandizing, sycophancy for the rulers, even though there's zero evidence of it. I myself have never spoken about any, certainly not every ever living ruler, except as in this instance, the response say, where's the proof? Where do you hear us doing that? We praise the rulers of the companions because Allah is pleased with them. Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, Ali, Muawiyah, Abdullah ibn Zubair. If Allah is pleased with them, then we're pleased with them, and there's obviously good and reward in mentioning their traits and in recalling their deeds and their feats and their ruleship. Beyond that, historically, there's also a benefit for the sake of teaching moments in talking about rulers of the past, whether they are worthy of being mentioned or honored or remembered due to their bravery, due to their decency, their piety, their astuteness, their intelligence, their knowledge. All of that from a historical perspective is good to mention, but the present day rulers we don't, generally, based on what we've already seen. However, as it's came up and as we've been given a segue into that very topic, let's watch this video in the background. This is of a visit of the current ruler of Syria, formerly known as Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani, now going by the name as name, his birth name, apparent birth name, Ahmad al-Sharra, still claiming to be of Jolan, of the Golan Heights, captured by the Israelis back in the day. And this is him visiting Saudi Arabia and meeting with the dignitaries and royalty, and of course, inevitably, the king there. So, how do we feel about this? This is a good thing, but not for perhaps the reasons enemies will think we are saying, because we're not fools. We don't deny the fact that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned in authentic hadith that Allah will bring prophethood, and then he will raise the prophethood, and then he will establish the rightly guided caliphate, and then he will raise it when he wills to raise it. Then there will be a tyrannical succession, and then he will raise it, and there will be a biting tyranny, or biting tyranny came first, and then another version of tyranny will follow, and then the Khilafah will return upon the prophetic minhaj or methodology. So it's not incorrect to say between those times, between the times of the original rightly guided caliphate and the return of the Khilafah, which many scholars understand will come with the descent of the Mahdi, that between that time, the generality of rulership is tyranny. Of course, you will have the odd exception, but that's the general trend. And we can say this is obvious when we go to every Muslim country. There's always something that we would be unpleased with, something we will turn our noses up at, be it in terms of dodgy practice of Islam being tolerated, be it in terms of Sharia violation, hedonism, alcohol, and everything in between. All of that we know happens around the world. So this meeting, or this visit by the Syrian, we'll play it again just as for the sake of having something in the background, by the leader of Syria to the leadership of Saudi Arabia, it could be potentially that rulers gather in such meetings to decide to open up a bunch of brothels. It's possible, but unlikely. It's highly unlikely. It's possible that they get together to decide privately, away from the cameras, how they will declare war on the Zionist state and purify it of the filth who have occupied it. I mean, we could wish for that to happen, but perhaps that is also unlikely. All of that would be speculation, and frankly, it's got nothing to do with you or I. What is interesting, and this is the point, what we always look for, where there's some benefit in our religion, is that for the first time in 1,000 years, you have the region of the Najd, Central Arabia, and this part of Bilad al-Sham, Syria, where you have an Athari, Salafi, Sunni, how can you say, religious infrastructure in power. That's not to say that individuals, be they the rulers or their regimes, are necessarily religious or even pious or even rightly guided in any capacity. We're not making that grandiose claim. That's between them and Allah. What we're saying is that institutionally, the institution of Saudi Arabia and also Qatar and Kuwait, and to some extent, I don't know how much, to be honest, Emirates, is Athari. At the institution level, the scholarship and the works and the libraries, its foundation, at least for the past couple of hundred years, has been Athari, has been Salafi. Likewise, Syria, since the takeover by HTS, and I don't know if they still call themselves HTS or simply the current government in Syria, reflects an Athari persuasion. And we can get into what we mean by that. Essentially, we mean Quran and Sunnah, religion derived from Quran and Sunnah and the understanding of the Salaf, as opposed to Kalam. I mean, we could mention other deviations such as Shiaism, etc., but even that is speculative theology. And we haven't seen this in centuries. We had a Taymiyyah moment in the 13th century, but that did not assume absolute power, in that Ibn Taymiyyah had his fans, he had his supporters from one or two sultans while he was alive, certainly, and even after. But that theological foundation, those usul, those pure Sunni principles, did not get established at the political level like they did with the Emirate of Dir'iyah following the Pact of Dir'iyah at the time of Ibn Abdul Wahhab. So this is why this is significant. Again, we're not talking about the politicians or the politics up there. We're talking, or what we're concerned with, is what matters to us at the ground level, how we're able to potentially see and engage in and partake in the restoration of Islamic orthodoxy in a country where it was not just diminished, in some places prohibited, and certainly actively fought against both at the intellectual level, but also at the physical level in terms of slaughter of the Sunnis under Bastard al-Assad, even under his father, when there was relative freedom, when people could go and would go to study in Syria, Islam and Arabic, etc. I remember I was speaking to one Syrian kid overseas, university student, and he was asking me, we were in some in the sticks somewhere in Europe, the edge of Europe, and he was asking about Abu Huraira. He said, do we trust him or not? I said, what do you mean, do we trust him? What kind of question is this? He's a companion of Allah's Messenger. He goes, I know, but isn't he also a liar? I said, astaghfirullah, why would you say that? He goes, well, that's what we were taught in school. He was from Damascus. That's what his teachers were teaching him, that Abu Huraira is a lie. And of course, this is from the Shia tradition. So that, and we hopefully those days are long gone. As a proof for that,
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. هذا كتاب الأصول الثلاثة وأدلتها بفضل الله عز وجل أصبح يوزع بالمجان في مدينة دمشق بفضل الله تعالى. هذا أو الكتيب الذي كان ممنوعا وإن رؤية مع أحد منا كان بوجهه سكارسة على صدنايا كما يقال. بفضل الله تعالى أصبح يوزع الآن بالمجان الأصول الثلاثة وأدلتها. هذا الكتاب يعرف العبد على ربه وعلى دينه وعلى نبيه صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم.
So that's very, very significant. And again, it doesn't require too much commentary because it's kind of self-evident what he's saying. Most people don't appreciate the significance of this book and its commission and the effect it had on the restoration of Islamic orthodoxy, or it's having. We can't say it's complete, but it's having. Everyone knows, or perhaps many Muslims will know, I should say, of the Council of Nicaea 325, when the Athanasian Creed, the Trinity that we know today, that the three constituents of the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, that's when that creed became championed, even though Constantine, the emperor who oversaw it, remained of the Arian creed, which was less shirky, still had some divine characteristics for Jesus. They still called him a son of God of sorts, but they did not hold him to be co-equal. They did not hold him to be akin to God himself. The Trinitarians won the day, and thereafter, eventually, especially after other councils, what they would then deem heterodox, people, Christians who didn't believe in a Trinity, were persecuted until eventually they ceased to exist, except in some pockets in remote corners or beyond the Roman Empire. So that's a very significant moment in the history of the world, especially in the history of Christianity. 325, Council of Nicaea. Many Muslims know about it, perhaps more than even Christians, because we appreciate the significance of it establishing this polytheism in place of a more orthodox, more monotheistic expression of Christianity, because the truly monotheistic expressions were also around at that time, and they had no chance. If even the Arian creed, with its semi-divine status for Jesus, was not going to be allowed because it did not hold him to be God himself, then you can imagine how even the more truer and purer Christianity, i.e. Islam itself, the religion of Islam that was practiced by the people between Isa alayhi salam and Muhammad, they were not to be tolerated in the slightest. So we also had, as Muslims, a Nicene moment in the year 1065. That's when the Nizamiya madrasa system got established in Baghdad, after the Asha'ira, the Asharis, were a obscure sect in faraway Khurasan, in and around Nisapur. Up until that time, the Ummah was generally Athari, Quran and Sunnah, upon the way of the Sahaba, and their creed was derived purely from revelation, Sunnah and Quran, as opposed to Kalam, as opposed to speculative theology derived from the Greeks via Jahm bin Safwan and the deniers of Allah's attributes. So this was the state of Islam under the Khulafa Rashidun, under the Umayyads, with a small interruption of the Qadris, which I cover in a video of Manharif Multiverse for those who are interested. And then you had the Abbasids took over, but they were still generally Athari, except for we had a short break with the Mu'tazilites, but then with the restoration of orthodoxy, one of the caliphs, one of the Abbasid rulers, even wrote a book of creed, which was affirming the Athari creed. But then you had coups by the Buwayhid Shia, and they were taken out, they were removed in the 11th century, mid-11th century, by the Seljuk Turks. And the Seljuk Turks themselves didn't really attach themselves to any particular creed. They were in a process of converting to Islam. They hadn't fully given up their animist pagan traditions, but they'd embraced Islam. And they relied on the Persians, where they were based in Khurasan, to do the administration for them. And those Persians, especially the Nizam al-Mulk, happened to be an Ashari. And that's how we had our Nicene moment, where the orthodoxy of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, of Ahlul Athar, was overtaken at the political level. It was usurped at the political level with the coming of the Seljuk. So you had a Turkic military caste with a Persian administration, which removed then the Qurashis, the descendants of the tribe of the Prophet ﷺ, from power, from Baghdad, and prior to that, of course, they'd been in Damascus and Kufa, and prior to that, they'd been in Medina under the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and his first companions. So Usul al-Thalatha, as an example, restores the fundamentals of faith to the Quran and Sunnah, because Usul al-Din, as it's known amongst the people of Kalam, is Kalam. That's what they refer to as Usul al-Din. Look at their definitions. They are not actually revelation based. Whereas for Ahl Sunnah, Usul al-Din is what is recognizable as the Deen, and this is how it was commissioned. We have here from Abdulaziz, the son of Muhammad bin Saud, and he requested the Shaykh, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, may Allah have mercy on him, that he write a concise treatise on Usul al-Din, the fundamental principles of the religion, the foundational principles of the religion. So he wrote this, and Abdulaziz sent it to all quarters and ordered the people to study it. What did he write? He wrote this book, Usul al-Thalatha, or Thalathat Usul wa Adillatuha, the three fundamentals and their proofs. It has two names because one is an abridged version of an otherwise abridged book. And what is that book about? It says, know that may Allah grant you success in what pleases Him and protect you from the path displeasing to Him, that from what is obligatory upon every Muslim, male and female, is knowledge of the three principles or three fundamentals, and to act upon them. The first principle being, or the first foundation or fundamental, all these words are synonyms, is that the slave know their Lord. That's the first one. And the second principle or foundation is knowledge of the religion of Islam itself. And the third one is knowledge of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we have many hadith where mentions these three principles, and that's where this idea is derived from. Not least, of course, the hadith of the grave, where when a person enters a grave, they will be asked, who is your Lord? What is your religion? How do you know this man? Or what do you say about this man, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So this returned it to something which was very familiar. And we have, of course, the statement of Ali radiallahu anhu, where he said, Hadithun nas bima ya'rifun. Teach the people according to what's familiar to them. Whereas if you look at discussions of Usul al-Din, it's all highbrow philosophy and kalam and talking about universals and all this kind of, infinite regresses and all this kind of stuff that goes over people's heads, and at the end of the day does nothing for the heart, does not attach you to Allah's messenger, because it is devoid of the speech of Allah's messenger. It is actually the speech paraphrased or rephrased of Aristotle, Pseudo-Dionysius, filtered via the Jews and Christians of Harran and Jahm bin Safwan. That's essentially what Usul al-Din is to the people of Kalam, as opposed to the people of Sunnah and those who truly adhere to the teachings of the Quran. What did Ibn Taymiyyah say? Ibn Taymiyyah said he's talking about now, he's going to combine two things which are very characteristic, shall we say, of the so-called Wahhabi Dawah. Of course, we're using this kind of tongue-in-cheek. It's mostly used as a slur, as a derogatory term, but I'm just taking ownership of it here, just in terms of academic purposes, because it makes it easier to refer to that particular movement of a particular time frame, as opposed to expressions of Salafiyah in India or in the Maghreb, in Morocco, or in Syria or Turkey or elsewhere. So Ibn Taymiyyah, talking about the people of Kalam, the Mutakallimin, dispraising them, essentially mentioning some of their obsessions, he then says they excluded from Tawheed, from the oneness, unity of Allah, they excluded from that which is a part of it, such as Tawheed al-Ilahiyya, which is a synonym for Uluhiyya or Tawheed al-Ibadah, either oneness of Allah's right to be worshipped exclusively. The Ahlul Kalam, the Mutakallimin, the Mutakallima, remove this aspect from Tawheed and the affirmation of the true meanings of Allah's names and attributes. This is what they did to Tawheed. So they stripped Tawheed of two very important parts, two with three, if we divide into three categories. They diminished the aspect of Allah's unicity and His exclusive right to be worshipped, but also the reality of His names and attributes. And they did not recognize Tawheed except through Tawheed or Rububiyyah. This is Ibn Taymiyyah saying this, by the way. Ibn Taymiyyah in the 13th century, in his book Minhaj al-Sunnah. They didn't recognize Tawheed except Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, i.e. His Lord Godship, and that is affirming that Allah is the creator and the Lord, sustainer, cherisher of all things. So here we see in that Ahlul Kalam, their crimes are twofold. One is in terms of Usul al-Din. They took the Ummah away from Quran and Sunnah. They filtered the understanding of Quran and Sunnah through essentially a Greek philosophy, or the philosophy of Aristotle, a negationist philosophy, the philosophy of Ta'til, that which divests Allah of His names and attributes. And the second aspect is that they gave scant significance to Uluhiyya, the exclusiveness of Allah's right to be worshipped alone, particularly with Sufism, which developed from the 9th century onwards. Particularly after that, it got really wild and wacky. Anyway, so this is what the dawah, the restorative dawah of Ibn Abdul Wahhab, it brought two things back to their primacy in the religion, that Allah alone should be worshipped, and that religion is to be taken exclusively from the Quran and Sunnah. I'll play another clip. It's a 2-minute clip. I subtitled it, but it's quite nice, and it just shows the accessibility of the true religion, of the true expression of the book and the Sunnah, so much so that even a child can understand it. And in fact, when Ibn Abdul Wahhab was commissioned with Usul al-Thalatha, the three principles, it was stated that the purpose would be that everyone would understand it, that even the lay person as well as the scholar, the child as well as the adult. And here is a proof of that.
أين نأخذ عقيدتنا؟
من القرآن والسنة.
أين الله؟
في السماء على العرش.
ما الدليل من القرآن على أن الله على العرش؟
العرش استوى.
الرحمن على العرش استوى. ما معنى استوى؟
على وارتفع.
لماذا خلق الله الجن والإنس؟
لعبادته وحده لا شريك له.
ما الدليل من القرآن على أن الله خلق الجن والإنس لعبادته؟
وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون.
ما معنى يعبدون؟
يوحدون.
ما معنى لا إله إلا الله؟
لا معبود إلا الله.
ما أعظم عبادة؟
التوحيد.
ما هو التوحيد؟
إفراد الله بالعبادة.
ما أعظم معصية؟
الشرك.
ما هو الشرك؟
عبادة غير الله مع الله.
كم أقسام التوحيد؟
3.
ما هي أقسام التوحيد؟
الربوبية والألوهية والأسماء والصفات.
ما تعريف الربوبية؟
إفراد الله بأفعاله
مثل؟
الخلق والرزق.
ما تعريف الألوهية؟
إفراد الله بأفعال العباد
مثل؟
الدعاء والذبح والسجود.
هل لله أسماء وصفات؟
نعم.
من أين نأخذ أسماء الله وصفاته؟
من القرآن والسنة.
هل تشبه صفات الله صفاتنا؟
لا.
ما الدليل من القرآن على أن صفات الله لا تشبه صفاتنا؟ ليس
كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير.
القرآن كلام من؟
الله.
منزل أو مخلوق؟
منزل.
وهو كلامه حقيقي
قسم.
بحرف
وصوت.
هو محمد
هو محمد بن عبد الله بن عبد المطلب بن هاشم بن عبد مناف بن قصي.
برافو أحسنت.
Bravo indeed. So, two things then so far to recap. Usul al-Din, returning the fundamentals of the religion to that which is revealed to the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the Quran, the verbatim speech of Allah, or the Sunnah, the transmitted revelation upon the tongue of the Prophet from his own words. Of course, you have Hadith Qudsi, which is the words of Allah direct in their own form. But either way, Quran and Sunnah is considered revelation. And then you have the actual focus on the whole purpose, which the girl eloquently explained for us anyway, which is to worship Allah, to single out Allah in his worship. And this should be obvious, but through sophistry and deviation, it became clouded, it became lost, so much so to the extent that it resembled the religion of the masses, began resembling the religion of those outside of Islam. I'm going to play a clip where you have the leader of leader of Britain First, formerly an Islamophobe, Jada Franson, speaking to Dilly Hussein on 5 Pillars, and Dilworth is asking her about her conversion, or her, you could say conversion from Catholicism to a kind of born-again version of Christianity, a kind of evangelical Protestantism. And I want you to pay, it's just a short clip, but pay attention to this argumentation, or the rationale she gives for her changing from the version of Christianity she was on before to where she is now.
They were putting a priest in front of me and saying I had to confess my sins to him, instead of just speaking to Jesus, speaking to God. They were putting statues of the Virgin Mary in front of me and saying that I need to ask her to intercede. I need to pray to her. People used to say to me, Protestants used to say to me, before I was one, Protestants used to say to me, you pray to the Virgin Mary. I used to say, no, I don't ask her to pray for me. You pray to the saints. No, I don't ask them to pray for me. Well, why are you doing that? Why aren't you just praying? Instead of you asking the saints and asking Mary, why aren't you praying to God? Mm-hmm. And I didn't have an answer for that. Just thought, oh, Protestants, what are they talking about?
That's quite fascinating. Of course, we have to add here, as far as her conception, the Christian's conception, Jesus is God. So that's obviously flawed, understatement. And the flaw is even in the logic there itself, because she didn't understand, didn't see the logic, the rationale in praying to Mary when she could pray to God. But for her, God is also Jesus. And Jesus had a mother. So you won't pray to, in your theology, the mother of God, but you'll pray to the Son of God, who's also God. But still, if we put that to one side and understand that from her theology, Jesus is God, she's saying, why do I need an intermediary? Why do I need an intercessor? And you saw Dilworth there understood the implications clearly in terms of the non-Wahhabi schools and sects, because that's exactly what they justify. They justify going to pray through intermediaries. And of course, this is an argument that was refuted, or that is refuted throughout the Quran. For example, Allah is saying that the religion is for Allah alone, and those who take allies and protectors, awliya is used in the ayah, besides him, they say, we worship them only that they may bring us near to Allah. Then Allah says, verily, Allah will judge between them concerning that wherein they differ. Truly, Allah guides not him who is a liar and a disbeliever. So that argument, it stands for Christians who use intermediaries. It stands for Hindus and Buddhists and misguided Muslims who take intermediaries when they are commanded to worship none but Allah alone. Now, perhaps many people are aware that in these last few weeks, I mean, not that it's something unique to this particular time, but throughout our activity in Islam, there is this term Wahhabi used as a slur, and you'll also find other words used in a derogatory manner, such as madkhali. But in regards to this term Wahhabi, you will probably be aware of what's going on in these last few weeks, where you have people like Daniel Hikikachu, and he's not the first of the modern day social media influencers. I'm reluctant to say du'at or call us to Islam, because when you call is misguided, it's not appropriate to attach you to the call to Islam. But anyway, and this is something that he certainly didn't invent. It's not something new for him, but it's something that is quite current. And you'll find, and it's a good way to see a person's paucity of reading, of learning, when they make set piece go-to slurs against a dawah, a salafiyah, or against the pure call to Quran and Sunnah. And there will be things like related to Wahhabism, specifically Ibn Abdul Wahhab was not really an intellectual. He was nothing compared to Ibn Taymiyyah. He was a violent takfiri. He mass takfired the Ummah. He's the inspiration for Daesh or ISIS. Then following on for that, they make other tangentially related statements and claims, such as Ibn Taymiyyah believed in the finality of the fire. He didn't believe that the hellfire would be eternal. What other kind of stuff? Even to the extent, because you saw a quote of Barbahari right at the top of the show, they say Barbahari is misattributed. It was actually written by a deceptive, deceiving zealot by the name of Ghulam Khalil. You'll hear these, and I can list some other set-piece, sound-bited points that are used to score points against Salafis. The reality is, when you hear these statements and they come out at that level, you know that you're dealing with extreme amateur academia. It's, if we can even call it academia. I remember the first essay I ever wrote at university, first year of university, first semester. And my supervisor, she herself was an extremely smart woman. Her own mentor, supervisor, was a professor, well-renowned and published professor in Oxford. And then after she'd done with us, she went and took a teaching tenure at Cambridge. But first essay I did, and she marked it a B plus or something like this. And I thought it was really good. So I thought, why wouldn't it be an A? What's wrong with it? It was well formatted. I wrote it very well. I'd cleanly shone. I'd understood the subject. What's going on? So I asked her, I said, why did I get a B plus? Why is it not an A? And she said, well, I could try remarking it if you want. I took that as a bit of a diss. I said, no, if you think it's worth a B plus, that's fine. But I just want to know the rationale behind it. What is the process that I need to be aware of in order to get an A with you? And she said, if you can prove, or if you demonstrate, she said, you've read the material, you get a C. A C simply proves that you're familiar with the subject matter. In order to get a B, you need to critically evaluate that material. You have to show the strengths and weaknesses of the arguments, of the hypothesis. What's a plural for hypothesis? Someone that are being stated. So that's as far as I got. I got a B plus because I did evaluate the opposing discourses in this particular subject matter. She said, in order to get an A, though, you have to do all of the above or all of the below, plus you must bring something of your own understanding to the table. You must show where you have contribution, which you'll often find with, certainly with PhDs, say a contribution to the academy. Or something that people can then reference in addition to the previous read material. Potentially, they can now access what you've put forth of content of intellectual output. So these statements that I mentioned, these claims against Ibn Abdul Wahhab was takfiri, that ISIS or Daesh are simply descendants of his theology, that Ibn Taymiyyah believed in the finality of the fire. What was the other one we said? Barbahari didn't write his Sharh al-Sunnah. These claimants, others like them, show that people haven't even got a C. They aren't even familiar with the material, let alone critically evaluated, let alone actually brought something new to the table. So this is what I would call charlatan academia, and that's what we see all too often being used as a stick to beat so-called Wahhabis with. How can we prove this? Well, we'll stick, for the purposes of this episode, this broadcast. I wanted to actually cover parts of Eastern Europe, and then India, and then the Ottoman Empire, or Turkey today, actually, not the Ottoman Empire, but Turkey today, modern Turkey, the Republic, and make some mention of the West where we are, but time won't permit, so maybe we can do a dedicated series on those other regions. But let's at least stay with Eastern Europe because it ties into the thumbnail. So let's pay attention to this.
There was one guy that beat me in the Olympic semifinals. His name was Haji Murad Gutsalov. We're lucky that son of a bitch didn't fight, because he would have beat everybody, and John Jones included. Every one of them would have got their ass whipped by that dude.
Really?
He was good, bro. He wrestled me at the Olympic Games, and he beat all of us, though. He beat me. He beat Kel Sanderson. He beat Kyle Snyder. He beat all the best Americans for a long time. He wrestled from my Olympic cycle all the way to Kyle Snyder, who won the 2020 Olympic Games. That guy beat him. This dude was so fast. He was so good. I brought him in to train with me for John Jones. My strength coach told me he would try to break him. He said, Daniel, I would try to break this guy. He goes, I would give him all of my workouts. He goes, and then I would add just to try to see how far he would go. He said, no matter what I did, he never stopped. He never got tired. And he goes, he always wanted to do more. He never questioned anything. And that dude, that's why the dude's like a 6-time world champion, Olympic champion, everything. He was the best, man. And we're just lucky he didn't fight, because all of us would have no accomplishments. He was that
video
good.
of this dude?
I knew that if guys like that started fighting, they would be a problem. And that's exactly what they've become. I mean, look at him. This is the guy right here. It's him. We were training. This dude would just hit me with all kinds of stuff. I actually, and we're sweating too. He just never stopped, bro. The guy was just tremendous in everything he did. So I would have to set my mind every day going into the room like I was about to wrestle in the Olympic Games, because I knew how hard it would be to try to go with this cat. Then he would be beating on these dudes in MMA. He against the wall like it was impossible to take him down. And but look at this though, Joe. Everybody would just watch. Dude taking me down. They got the UFC cameras. I'm like, yo, cut that. Wow. I'm like, cut it.
This is some wild scrambles. Yeah. Oh, you got him?
I got one, but that's probably the only one I got for a month. And then at times I thought he might be letting me. I'm like, yo, are you letting me score, man? Because I wrestled you in competition and I ain't never scored. But I mean, he was just too good, Joe. I mean, he beat me in Olympic semifinals. He beat everybody.
This person he's talking about, Haj Murad Gastalov, he's an acquaintance of a couple of acquaintances of mine. And before this current genocide, if you recall, the genocide itself against the Palestinians, it followed some incursions by the Israelis into Masjid al-Aqsa. This is early 2023. In fact, they do this routinely. So this was before October 7, well before October 7. And I reached out to him via a friend. I said, could he send a message, just some kind of message to encourage people? For those who are familiar with him, for those who recognize his celebrity, it might have some effect. So this is the message. That same guy who you saw in that video, who Daniel Comey was talking about, this is what he said.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Haj Murad Gatsalov. I am Olympic champions. Al-Aqsa in our hearts forever.
Okay, so what's the big deal? So you got a Muslim, clearly from the Russian Caucasus, and he's religious. And the point is, how did these people become religious? This is what we want to get to, the region of this person. Prior to the revival of Islam, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Islam they had was the Islam that we've spoke about, we've already dispraised, that of the extreme Sufis, that of the Rafida, the Shia, the people of Kalam, and it didn't do anything for them. We mentioned one of the smears made against the dawah of Ibn Abdul Wahhab, that it's violent, it follows mass takfir, and it's akin to what we saw with the so-called Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. That is not the case clearly with these people. Most of these people, the religiosity you see across that region, it came through the back of books like Usul al-Thalatha, in Kitab al-Tawheed, and it did not follow or did not lead to the presentation and the translation, distribution, presentation of these books and their teaching did not lead to violent extremism, did not lead to children takfiring their parents, who may well have been very, very far from Islam in terms of disreligiosity. But even so, the dawah spread peacefully. If there was violence, it was unrelated to the actual religion itself, not due to anyone preaching any violence. It's more due to state brutality, not knowing how to cope, how to react with the spread of Islam, with the spread of religiosity, with women adopting hijabs, with men frequenting mosques all too often and growing their beards. That's where violence started. And then, of course, there was independence movements, but not due to Muslims themselves learning from these books that they have to go around takfiring and tafjiring, blowing people up or killing. That's a separate phenomenon, not related to this. This brother that you saw, this Olympic champion, he was taught his Islam by a very good friend of mine who translated this book. I've hidden his name because I don't want to keep his anonymity. You can see the Arabic, al-usul al-thalatha, and the Russian says three osnovi ich dakazat tilstva. So it really should be thalathat al-usul wa adillatuha, but it's using the other title because it's shorter. And here it says the author is Sheikh Mohammed bin Sulaiman al-Tamimi. Who do you think that is? Well, it's obvious. It should be obvious. Muhammad bin Sulaiman al-Tamimi was a pen name, a pseudonym that was used for Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. And the reason it was used for Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab is because had you been caught with any lecture, any publication with Ibn Abdul Wahhab's name on it, you would face a prison sentence. And that's not hyperbole. You would actually face a prison sentence. A couple of friends of mine in the capital did their own publishing, just like this, but you can tell by the cover and the quality. This is a self-funded project. It's not from any petrodollars. Self-funded translation, self-funded publication and distribution. So much so that the Sufis decided that they weren't going to tolerate this religiosity. They would rather have people disreligious or non-religious than they be practicing Wahhabis. And so they would complain to the police state, and they would say these people are spreading extremism. And immediately, if you were caught with these, you would go to prison. So I had friends who spent 2 years, subhanAllah, they were dirt poor as it is, 2 years in prison simply because he published a small tract on Tawheed and refuting shirk. He spent 2 years in prison. Not that the military or the police themselves saw him as a danger, it's because the people of Kalam grassed him up. Just like myself, I'm banned. I'm not allowed to enter certain countries, not because the authorities see me as anything dodgy or dangerous themselves. It's because the Mutasawwifa, the Shia-leaning Shaira, grassed me up and they said I'm spreading extremist theology, so I'm banned. I got off lightly compared to, these people who languishing in prison and others who've been shot. Again, the authorities themselves, the non-Muslim authorities, they're kind of, blissfully ignorant themselves about these distinctions, but it's the people of innovation who cause trouble, and they're happy to see Muslims perish in prison while their wives and children suffer without, of course, no welfare state here. So they're having to live off handouts, and they're poor as it is. It's not as if they're on any stipend from the Middle East or from rich donors. All of these are from their own efforts and own collections, and others, as I say, are actually executed. So the brother who translated that book into Russian, Usul al-Thalatha, is the same teacher of this Olympic phenom. You can show another book here. This one's actually from the Saudi Ministry of Islamic Affairs. And you can see here it's Wujum al-Amal bi-Sunnati Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam wa kufr man ankaruha, the obligation or the necessity of acting upon the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the kufr of the one who rejects it. That's by Bin Baz, and this is by the Ministry of Islamic Affairs, translated into Russian. So you have, in terms of dawah projects, there's three levels. There's the state-sponsored ministries. This one that was formerly under, I don't know if it still is, Sheikh Saleh Ali Sheikh. And I was happy to take their money. I'll say that very, very frankly, for projects I did with them. Then you have the private dawah offices. And I did not take any money for the work I did with them, which was more charity. And then I had my own projects from my own resources. And these three tiers, and most people who are involved in Islam or studies will cross into these three aspects of dawah when they're working in the Gulf, and even actually outside the Gulf, even in quote-unquote non-Wahhabi countries. If the state thinks you have some utility, interlocutors with the state, that is, the awqaf or the endowments branch or division, and then they may employ you and give you some work. So you have state-sponsored Islamic ministries, then you have private dawah projects run by wealthy individuals, billionaires in some cases, and then you have what we do ourselves as individuals. The state, at least the projects that I was involved in, was targeting the Anglosphere and the West. West was their focus. The private dawah offices, they were more for the laborers and the workers. So now we're talking the third world, South Asia, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa. And the part of the globe that I felt was neglected was the former Eastern Bloc countries, the former Soviet states and their satellites. And that's where I would do my own private work and how I got in touch with some of these guys. And again, there was no violence. There was no mass takfir. no mass murder, while they were reading the books of Ibn Abdul Wahhab, be it Kitab al-Tawheed, be it Usul al-Thalatha, and other than that, and books related to the dawah or related to Salafiyah as a whole, did not lead them towards extremism or extremist violence. Again, we're not denying those things didn't happen, but they weren't due to the knowledge, they were due to an absence of it. Let me give you some personal anecdotes. So there was one family who I was close with, one brother who was a, what would you call him, a draft dodger. He was a lonely child, and so his mother would have him hide in a home. He'd sneak out when he needed to do things that whatever needed doing, fetching items that the mother couldn't get herself, etc. And the reason he was staying hidden and his mother wanted that for him is because at that time the military was very brutal with Muslims. You have hazing in the UK army. It's far worse in this part. I don't want to mention which country this is, but anyway, let's just say it's to the east. So she would keep him hidden in her home, and when he wanted to meet up and chat and, you know, would give classes, she'd sometimes gather other people she trusted. We do private secret classes like this, secret teaching. So she would call, because of course he can't call, right? Because then, you know, if the phone is being monitored, he'd get found out. So she'd call, say, oh, like, you invite you over for some tea or something. And all of this was code. It meant my son wants to see you. Anyway, one day she called me over, and when I got there was this guy. She introduced him as her new husband, and he was significantly younger than her. She was of advanced age. He was also of an ethnic group which was deemed superior to hers. In other words, she'd scored well with him. She got a man who was maybe 10, if not 15 years younger. Not that that's a problem, of course, not that there's anything wrong with that. However, it is against the norm. It's rare as opposed to the opposite. And as I said, he had a higher social status. So that was interesting. And then we got talking, and very quickly it dawned on me, he had a little crew with him, that this man was an absolute maniac. And for her, she was getting something out of it. She was, you know, aged, as I said, and lonely, and now she had a man who would help her and who could do the errands that her son was previously at risk having to do. We had a group with him, a group of young guys. Half of them were converts, and the other 2 or 3 were from the region, various ethnic groups from this particular country. One of the converts stood out because he stood out because of his size. He was super heavyweight. He was an Olympic prospect. He was only 18, 19, but he was already on that road. He had very, very good skills in Greco-Roman wrestling, and that seemed to be where he was heading. Yet this guy, who styled himself, let's say, as an emir of this Jama'ah, of this group, this was his gang essentially. And he had a criminal past, and now he's reformed. But he knew nothing about Islam, yet he was talking about taking over a region, launching a jihad to take over a region where you actually had a strong Islamic dawah project or community involved in dawah, led by an imam of a masjid and a preacher, extremely popular, and he had several thousand people who he was in charge of, in the sense that they would be at his beck and call. It wasn't purely Salafi, but we were trying our best to take him to that direction, lest he should put himself and his followers towards destruction by prematurely going and fighting to establish a mini khilafah or whatever dreams Muslim youth or Muslim activists would aspire for. So this guy, who is now the stepfather of my friend, had broken off from the wider Jama'ah. The wider organization had several thousand people, with some knowledgeable people there, whether they're studied in Al-Azhar or other places. They had knowledge, and they were coming onto Salafiyah. They were learning fresh, anew, shunning false worship. There was no holy men or saints or awliya, any of that nonsense amongst them. There was not actually any innovations they engaged in worship. Where there was some innovation, some straying, was in methodology, which, as I said, we're working on. So this guy broke off with his group. He took weapons, and he actually had the kahunas to fire shots over the heads of the Emir, of the Imam, to let him know very clearly, we're not going to see eye to eye. You go your way, I'll go my way, and should we see each other again, we're going to shoot. So he actually fired assault rifles over their heads, which is as clear as one can get in expressing that they're breaking off. And so I had this guy in the house of my friend, his new stepfather, his mother was there, and he had this small group. And he mentioned some of his harebrained ideas, how he thinks he's going to do a raid here and capture this and get some more weapons and then take some other guys from that group and eventually grow, and eventually he's going to establish an Islamic State. Of course, I did my level best to talk him out of it. I said, this is quite stupid. You need to focus on rectifying the Muslims who are Muslims by name but who have strayed from religiosity, and thereafter those Muslims who are religious but have mistakes in their creed and in their practice, you need to fix that. You need to invite the people with wisdom. There's so many non-Muslims here, there's a majority non-Muslims. You need to be giving them dawah. Why do you want to fight people when you can potentially have them as your fellow prayerful Muslims? And he gave the impression that he was listening, but I was to find out he wasn't listening at all. The point I want to make before I mention the end of this person and the unfortunate demise of his Jama'ah is that even though the Wahhabi dawah was prevalent, these books, Usul al-Thalatha, Kitab al-Tawheed, were there, those who were reading them were not those who were leaning towards this violent takfir and willing to fight other prayerful Muslims. They were the most ignorant of people. And we know this with Daesh. The people who would go, they would take Islam for dummies, and they'd just jump out of criminality, as with this guy, former mafia boss he was, and then they jump into Islam, and all of a sudden they become amirs and they become heads of groups. Anyway, some time passed, and Auntie called me and she asked me to come over, and there was a bit of concern in her voice, but even then she hid it very well. So I went over to the home, and it was very late, pitch black in fact, and her son wasn't there. She said, he's in hiding. I said, he's in hiding here? Why? Where else does he need to be hiding? What was he hiding from me? I said, no, we've had to completely hide him. He can't stay here. We're going to get raided. What do you mean we're going to get raided? And then she started crying and explaining that her new husband had taken this group of young lads, literally in their teens, 17, 18, 19-year-olds. I don't believe a single one of them was over 20. And he'd crossed a regional border, and he'd raided some rival mafias from his previous life in order to take their money to fund his new Islamic State. But the authorities were already aware, they're waiting on him, and there was a big shootout. They're all armed to the teeth with assault rifles, and of course the authorities had at least that much, and they had more. They threw a grenade. She showed me later a photograph of that same young brother, future Olympic prospect, and she showed me a photograph that the police, or whatever you want to call them, counter-terrorist unit, had handed to her, photographs of the aftermath of their ambushing the raid of her husband, her new husband. And this young lad, unfortunately, you saw him topless. He had this huge gash, huge stitches. His chest had been blown up. A grenade was thrown in his vicinity. His chest had been blown up, and then they stitched it. It seemed like with shoelaces from his navel all the way to his top of his chest. They'd sewn it back up. I said it looked like they did it with shoelaces, because there was that little flesh left on his center of his front, his chest and his abdomen, that they had to pull from his sides the skin across. That was the fate of this young lad, and all the other young lads. They all died tragically. And as for the guy, the ringleader, he'd survived. He got a shot in his face, shot in his neck, shot in his shoulder, several places, but he was alive. And he was due to serve many, many decades for his action. But because he had a good lawyer and there was corruption in those places, he was able to reduce his sentence to several years through essentially shifting the blame to the kids and some backhanders and whatnot. And that was the tragic end of this little group who thought they were going to establish Islam. The point I'm going to make is that Najdi Dawah, if you want to call it that, and I'm humoring our opponents here, the Dawah, Salafi Dawah, that was spread through the books of Ibn Abdul Wahhab, and via the Ibn Abdul Wahhab's Dawah, Ibn Taymiyyah's books, and the rest of our books of creed and authentic deeds were getting spread. That was happening in spite of these crazies, and these crazies were far from those circles, and those who were opposing them were those who were truly more knowledgeable than them, and their opposition was commensurate with their engrossing themselves in learning and in the books that would extol and be sourced from Quran and Sunnah and the school of the Salaf. So that's what I wanted to mention with regards to that. So, and this is just an anecdote to refute. And again, we could talk about so many without naming that country. We could talk about other countries. We could talk about subcontinents, the subcontinent, the continent of Europe and elsewhere, where this dawah has spread. And we don't go around mass takfiring people. We don't go around mass killing people or even being unnecessarily violent for that matter, even though we extol jihad. And even though we believe in the law to its fullest extent where it can be implemented, it should, and that would be a great thing in terms of corporal and capital punishments. We don't shy away from our religion or its entailments and what it necessitates in terms of governance and defending the borders and expanding the borders against those who've encroached and stolen land. We don't shy away from any of that. Yet at the same time, that's got nothing to do in terms of physical violence and actual mass takfiring. It's got nothing to do with our dawah. This is a smear and a lie. And had it been that these books and this dawah contained that within it, then you would see the results in these places with some of these celebrities and others, and we can mention many others in other places, where they were won over to this dawah in a way, to this call, that they weren't won over and they were indifferent to the dawah, what little there was of the mutasawwifa, the extreme Sufis, or the Rafida, and the people of Kalam in general. That's what I wanted to say by way of introduction, and hope that now with Syria, inshallah, we'll see, regardless of what happens at the political level, we hope to see that people will be able to access Sunni Athari creed in a way that they weren't before. I'll just mention what I said I was going to go to other places as well. I'll just mention one place in Turkey. I had some other clips. I'm unable to access them from a hard drive, where even at the end of the Ottoman Empire and at the beginning of the Turkish Republic, you had at the highest levels of Ahl al-Halli wal-Aqd, the very highest level, people who were on first name basis with Mustafa Kemal Ataturk himself, who would take Kemal Ataturk for task for his reneging on Ottoman tradition of Islam and having a sultanate. Amongst that very crowd, you had those who were, to all intents and purposes, card-carrying Wahhabis, who would by name raise the name of Ibn Abdul Wahhab and saying, our problem, our mistake, as we've now transitioned from the Ottoman Empire to the Turkish Republic, is that we did not latch onto this dawah. So forget those jokers who say that this is, mass takfiring the whole world and brought down the Ottomans and so on and all that nonsense, which I've dealt with at length and addressed at length in videos. And you'll actually find that even in Turkey today, the Sufis are more honest than the Sufis in the West in regards to Ibn Abdul Wahhab. They don't describe him, some of them, of course, not all of them, but some of them who are more just won't call him a Khariji. They won't say he was an enemy to the Ottoman state. They won't say he's outside of Ahlul Sunnah. Even today, contemporaneous Sufi preachers, where they actually say, he was actually from Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and he was on the madhab of Ibn Taymiyyah, except that he had some power behind him and he was able to achieve some things that others previously didn't do. This is from, I'll take the sound off, you don't need to hear it. This is from the Markaz Quran and Sunnah in Riza, the city of Riza, which is in the northeast of Turkey. This is Sheikh, what's his name? Walid Saif al-Nasir. Again, this is a non-government project. These scholars you see here, they have this mountain markaz high up in the northeast of Turkey, where they teach Quran Sunnah. Here you see on the right, Sheikh Abdul Malik Ramadani. He's an Algerian. The previous Sheikh, I believe, is Palestinian, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not too sure the Sheikh on the left. I've seen him, but I can't recall who he is or his nationality. And so they're not getting supported by any government to Turkey to give the dawah of Quran and Sunnah, teaching what the opponents will call Wahhabi texts. But as you'll see, they're just generally Quran Sunni books, whether from contemporary scholars, Sheikh al-Albani, or from early works of Ibn Taymiyyah or Bukhari, or commentaries of Quran Sunnah. Here's Sheikh Hussein al-Awaish, or is it Awaish? I can't remember where the Ain is in his name. from Jordan, Palestinian origin, teaching there. We'll just whiz through this. Who else we got? This is a sheikh from Sudan. I forgot his name. There's another sheikh, an Egyptian, Haysam Sarhan. And then they're showing some live link-ups. These are like mostly Syrians and Iraqis and some people from Central Asia, those who already have Arabic. Then you see some of the books they're teaching, and that's it's what would you call it, sign of this markaz, this Islamic Dawah Center, high up on a mountain in Riza. Riza, incidentally, is where the family of Erdogan, the current president of Turkey, comes from. He himself is of Georgian origin on his mother's side, of Laz and Muslim Georgian ethnic group. His family are based in Riza. He used to go back there in the summer, and he built a very fancy-looking mosque high up on a mountain, and this is a markaz on a mountain, and you can just see their library. Again, all financed by brothers themselves without any state support. There's a view from the, what do you call that, the mezzanine or the balcony, perhaps. Yeah, balcony is external, overlooking the mountain villages or the mountain residences, and there's the markaz there. Again, they're teaching, as the opponents would say, Wahhabi Islam, no extremism, no mass takfir, no violence of sorts, even though when those things are permitted, all of that would be accepted and implemented, and it's mentioned in the books and it's taught as well. Nothing of is shying away from. So I'll leave it there. I think we've covered. Is any other interesting clips? I don't think so. I think I've covered most of what I wanted to cover. So now we will go to any questions, if there's any questions. See if we can get a hold of this beast that is live streaming and have it conform. So yeah, welcome, Assalamu alaikum wa barakatuh to everyone. Maybe I should start at the top in case there's any questions. Inshallah, maybe face reveal. Yeah, well, let's Ukraine war finish first, because we have some assets there we need to protect, and depending on which side the victory falls on, we may have less reason to stay anonymous. Although that's only one reason; it's a major reason. Anything else? The Qasim corridors of Sharjah. Yes, they were great allies. The Wahhabis. I'm just reading through your comments. Okay, I guess there are none. So we will end it in 5 minutes. I want to thank you all for being here. And of course, this drama that's going on now, we will address it, inshallah, maybe on Thursday with a guest. All of this stuff going, all of this refutation and counter-refutation. What do you think about the Adnan, Rashid, and Daniel discussion? Well, that's a loaded question. So I will maybe talk about this in Thursday. So I have to say, everything that we said of everything that's coming out about Daniel now, for me personally, and not just me, it's a case of I told you so. If you go back in the playlist I did on him, although there's still one left, the very first video I mentioned, he neglects Tawheed. It's not an issue for him. His innovation, if we want to say he's got a particular innovation, what's particularly unique to Daniel is that for him, the dividing line, at least was then, between haqq and batil, is this kind of 4chani memeology, aggressive, anti-liberal, anti-woke, semi-red pill kind of Islam. That was his thing. Wherever you believed, whether you were Shi'i, Sufi, Sunni, Salafi, he didn't care. He was happy to entertain them all, because for him, he had a particular agenda, which I believe is due to his particular personal circumstances. He's kind of went in the opposite direction due to some experiences he had. So he's gone to the other extreme in terms of this in-your-face, snarky, attacky macho, red pillish kind of Islam. And I'm not doing a very good summation of it here, but it's in the first video. I kind of break it down. And that's all at the expense of the kalima, according to La ilaha illallah. So that's why we see all of this coming now. That's why we see the downplaying of the kufr of wilayat kuniyya. Again, wilayat kuniyya, I believe I was the first in English language to do a segment under the title of wilayat kuniyya in a video that the Iranians found so offensive that they managed to get blocked. Every time I try to put it up, they'd block it. So I have worked on a revised version, see if I can counter the block, and I will hopefully put that up. I meant to put it up last month, so I'll do that this month. There's not much left to do to clean that up and upload that. So these things, wilayat kuniyya, i.e. universal governorship, that the imams, according to Shia Islam, their imams from the lineage of Ali through Hussein, radiallahu anhum, may Allah be pleased with them, that they have control over the universe, over the entirety of the universe, that the universe is subjected to their will. So they have a share in Allah's rububiyyah, his Lord Godship. This is kufr, and Daniel was trying to downplay it. You saw in the stream that in the back and forth he had with Adnan Rashidi, quoted from an apologist for Khomeini, the same clip that I actually used, the same track where Khomeini talks about wilayat kuniyya. And this apologist for him, what does he say? He says, we know he couldn't have meant that the imams have really this absolute power over the atoms of the universe. He didn't mean it like that because he's a pious man. Why would he mean that? Yet in that same person, Khomeini, who they call a pious man, he likened the Sahaba to dogs. And he said in his book on Tahara, ritual purification, he likened and he named Hafsa and Aisha, and I believe he named also Zubair and Talha and Muawiyah, of course, and other than them perhaps. He said, they have their impurity is like a pig and a dog. If you were to touch them, it'd be like being made impure by pigs and dogs or something like this. I can't remember. But anyway, it's a saying of his. And this is a man who, according to Daniel, deserves to be given the benefit of the doubt for his kufr, because we don't take on the evidence of what he said. We do some crazy ta'wil. Why? Because he's so pious, and his piety as expresses in his revulsion and slander of the companions. It's worse than slander. It's defamation of the companions. So yeah, we will give some time to that and that whole Daniel thing and the debates and everything. Next Thursday with a guest, inshallah, we'll maybe talk about it. I'll just read this. Our Imam here in Texas is an Azhar graduate. Is that problematic? His beard is like a cm. I know what a cm is. You have to explain. Oh, centimeter long, and does things like say Allah is over and over again. Say Allah over and over again. I mean, being from Al-Azhar itself does not mean a person is dodgy, because you might find issues with every single university, and every single university will have, even if it's a good university, will have good lecturers as well as bad lecturers, and some places will have more than others. And really, you will go to university, you will extract from it what you want. So a person who is of sound creed and mind will benefit from the Arabic, from the memorization, from the tafsir, from the seerah, from the hadith, and whatever classes, and they will return with that, inshallah, unaffected if they went in there strong. In fact, some people might, abandon their falsehoods even by going to Al-Azhar if they were sincere. So it's not that being from Al-Azhar itself is problematic, unless someone adopts the overall sentiment of a great part of those who happen to be Ashari, then they will have Ashari problems with them. Yeah, that's all I'd say on that. So that itself isn't indicative of, it could be indicative, I should say, of it being problematic, but it's not necessarily so. Even having a beard, if a person has a short beard, it's indicative perhaps that a person is not strong on the sunnah, but it's not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily the case that if a person has a short beard, he has a problem. There are some fiqh positions which says so long as a beard is a beard, it's a beard, even if it doesn't flow long, and they interpret some hadith to that effect to allow them to justify that. So these might be indications, but they don't necessarily prove it. The way you would know, of course, is simply by what they're teaching. If the person, whether he's from Medina or Azhar or anywhere else, Kuala Lumpur, Islamabad, Kairouan, if they're teaching Quran, Sunnah, Sahaba, if that's their source of their inspiration and their knowledge, then that's all good. And if they're teaching other than Quran, Sunnah, Sahaba, or they're straying from those as their primary sources, or Quran, Sunnah as received by the agency of the Sahaba and the justice of the Sahaba, then that person's got problems. If Ahlul Kalam have deficiency in their Shahada in regards to Uluhiyya, as Ibn Taymiyyah said, why are they considered to still be the fold of Islam? Putting that particular issue aside, in general, we can say that something is kufr or is deficient, but that does not mean that we should, and I certainly would discourage it, and scholars discourage pronouncing that ruling upon people themselves. That is really on an Islamic state, an Islamic system. You would have a judge, a qadi, you would have, a body to interrogate someone who is accused of kufr, be it great or small. But that's not necessarily for us to get involved in. So, there is an issue of udhr bil jahl, the excuse of ignorance that a person may have. That's maybe enough to say on that. But bear in mind, when we say Ahlul Kalam as well, we are not, and this is a falsehood that's often leveled against the people of Sunnah, that when we are dissing, let's say you use that word dissing or putting down or disparaging the mutakallima, we're talking about everyone who is not a card-carrying Salafi. That's not the case. When we talk about an issue with the people, we're talking about the proponents of that sect, their scholars, quote-unquote scholars, their du'at, their leaders, the leaders of their group. We're not talking about the average person. Even if the average person might be anti-Wahhabi instinctively because that's what his culture and his community hold, that doesn't necessarily mean that person himself is a deviant. It's just that's the environment. He's just reflective, he or she is reflective of their environment. So we don't ascribe innovation to the average person without knowing them to be upon clear innovation, and certainly not with kufr. Otherwise, we would takfir everyone, which we don't do, despite the slander. What we must do, though, is call kufr for where it is. That belief is kufr. That practice is innovated. And we can certainly say that about kalam. Kalam is an innovation. Aspects of it delve into kufr, particularly the ta'til. There was, of course, which, again, this is not the time or place to get into. Well, it's maybe the place, but not the time, because I've taken too much of your time already. But, of course, there was a transitional phase where Ash'ari, Abul Hasan Ash'ari himself, in order to ingratiate themselves towards the Ahlul Hadith, they kind of adopted some orthodox positions, which was already an orthodox adoption post the Mu'tazilites, which is essentially what their heritage was. And over the course of centuries, that through the vehicle of the Shafi'i school, they became orthodox as far as the states were concerned, the Islamic polities. But as far as Ahlul Hadith were concerned, they are still, as in the group, the sect Ash'arism is innovated. It was not known for the first 3 centuries. These beliefs, these precepts, these philosophical suppositions came from pagans. I think I'll leave it there. I know there's a way, by the way, that you can copy messages or chat and paste them on the screen. That's one thing I've got to figure out. Also, I've got to figure out something called super chats, which you hear a lot about, but I've never done one myself, so I've got to figure that out as well. So that's some homework. But hopefully you enjoyed the show, even though we were a bit, hopefully not customarily late to get on the go. And with that, I will leave you, bid you adieu, and then I will go. Jazakallah khair, jazakumullah khair, I should say, in the plural, for your time. And we will do this again soon, hopefully this Thursday with a guest, and we will talk over and we will do some review of these dawah debates and dramas. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.